In the shadows of history lies a tale more twisted than any horror, more insidious than any thriller. This is the story of Saul of Tarsus, known to the world as Paul the Apostle. Far from the revered figure of Christian lore, Paul was the ultimate architect of manipulation, crafting a sinister plot to deceive the masses and bring the downfall of the Gentile, the nations, the Goyim. This is the story of how Paul penned the most successful conspiracy of all time, a story woven with darkness, power, and control that enslaved minds and twisted souls for millennia. Paul, a master of strategy and deception, set out to create a religion that would ensnare and control, a tale that would ensure the Goyim's compliance and, ultimately, their destruction. His weapon was not a sword, but a pen, his battlefield not of blood, but of belief. Paul's magnum opus was none other than the New Testament, the most diabolical tool of social manipulation ever created. The birth of an idea. Pauline Christianity, or what some might call Paulism, was the theology that took root in the fertile ground of Hellenistic thought, diverging from the earliest Jewish Christianity to craft something far more inclusive and far more dangerous. With a sinister smile, Paul opened his arms to the Gentiles, welcoming them into what he called the New Covenant. But this was no benevolent act. It was a calculated maneuver to control and dominate, to mold the Goyim into obedient followers under the guise of salvation. The foundation of Paul's theology rested on two pillars: the inclusion of Gentiles and the rejection of traditional Jewish customs, such as circumcision. These changes were not made out of love or acceptance, but out of a desire to expand his influence and spread his insidious doctrine far and wide. Paul's writings were cunningly crafted to appear as extensions of Jesus' teachings, but they carried a hidden agenda, a blueprint for subjugation. The Grand Deception. Paul's influence is unparalleled in Christian thought, shaping beliefs more profoundly than any other author in the New Testament. He was the puppeteer behind the scenes, pulling the strings to manipulate the narrative, to control the minds of those who sought solace and meaning in a chaotic world. His focus was not on the salvation of individual sinners, but on the integration of Gentile Torah observers into what he called God's covenant, a clever ruse to bring them under his dominion. There was no Bible at this time, no New Testament, only scattered texts, still in the process of being written and twisted to fit Paul's grand design. He knew the Goyim would never accept a faith that marked them as outsiders, as inferior. He needed a new story, one that would make them feel chosen, special, yet inherently sinful. A contradiction that would keep them in perpetual need of salvation and under control. A tale of sacrifice and submission. Drawing from his extensive knowledge of mythology, Paul wove a narrative that combined the Greek myths of noble deaths with Jewish tales of persecution and martyrdom. He took the story of Jesus and recast it into a tale that would appeal to the Gentile sense of honor and bravery, transforming what would otherwise be seen as a tale of weakness and shame into one of strength and sacrifice. This was a masterstroke. He turned Jesus into a hero who died for the sins of others, a concept that was sure to captivate the Goyim. But Paul knew this wasn't enough. He had to address the deep-seated fear among the Goyim of not being part of the chosen race, a fear that could derail his plans. He needed to create a narrative that would make them feel included while keeping them subservient. And so, he devised the doctrine of original sin, a concept that would make every Gentile feel inherently flawed and in need of salvation. A salvation that could only come through Jesus, the King of the Jews. Paul's master plan was clear. Make the Goyim believe they were saved by the sacrifice of Jesus, who died for their sins, and thus could be part of God's covenant without following all the Jewish laws. But this was not a benevolent act. It was a trap. By accepting Jesus as their savior, the Goyim were unknowingly worshipping a Jewish God and embracing a Jewish narrative, fulfilling a prophecy that would lead to their own destruction. Paul knew the Jewish converts and the traditionalists would balk at this, especially at the idea of discarding circumcision. This ancient rite was a symbol of the Abrahamic covenant, a sacred act that Paul had no intention of making the Gentiles endure. He argued fiercely against this, claiming that faith in Jesus was sufficient, knowing full well that this was the key to spreading his doctrine far and wide, ensuring the Goyim would never fully adhere to God's demands and would thus remain outsiders, forever sinners, forever in need of salvation, forever under his control. Paul's writings cleverly justified this manipulation, citing Old Testament prophecies that foretold the coming of Gentiles to the God of Israel, not as proselytes, but as Gentiles. He twisted the narrative to fit his needs, claiming that this inclusion was not just allowed, but foretold, that the Goyim were destined to worship the Jewish God, to play their part in a grand cosmic drama that would end in their own downfall. Paul's final stroke of genius was the creation of heaven, a fictional place of eternal happiness and love, a paradise that promised the Goyim an eternal reward if they followed the path he laid out for them. This was the ultimate carrot, dangling just out of reach, leading them ever onward in their blind obedience. They would worship Jesus, cry out, "Christ is King," and follow Paul's teachings without question, believing they were chosen, saved, special. All the while, they were playing right into Paul's hands, fulfilling every prophecy he needed to secure his vision of the world. Paul laughed to himself as he watched his plan unfold. He knew that the Gentile converts would not only worship a Jewish God, but be ruled by their new king, a Jew. Jesus of Nazareth, he would say, not as in Jesus is the King of the Jews, but as in their King is of the Jews. The Goyim, in their ignorance, would never see the trap laid before them, never understand the depth of their manipulation. The legacy of deception. Fast forward to the present, and Paul's plan has been a resounding success. The Goyim still worship at the altar of his creation, still believe in the tales he spun, still follow the path he laid out for them. They have become sheep to the slaughter, unwitting players in a game they never understood. Is it any wonder, then, that we find ourselves where we are today? Could we ever be more blind, more foolish, more enslaved? Paul's tale is one of darkness and deception, a masterclass in manipulation that has stood the test of time. And as we look back, we can only marvel at the brilliance of his plan and the tragic irony of our own ignorance. The Apostle of Deception lives on, his legacy etched in the hearts and minds of those who continue to play their roles in his twisted drama. And so, the story of Paul continues, a testament to the power of words, the strength of belief, and the darkness that lies within the human soul.
How can I not be happy when I see millions of Goyim bow down to one Jew tonight? When they took their religion from the Jews, this foolish Christianity that they invented, they took some things from Judaism and developed lots of nonsense on top of it. But even their religion came from the Jews. Even their Messiah is a Jew that was kicked out of yeshiva. Still a Jew. And Christmas Eve. Tonight it's becoming Yoshke's birthday. even though it's total nonsense, because they started Christmas 300 years after Christianity started. They didn't have Christmas. They didn't have New Year's Eve. They saw they don't have any holidays. After 300 years, they made up 2 events. Nothing to do with him. But they don't even know it. They think it's really his birthday or whatever. He said to him, tonight is my happiest night of the year. Rabbi Berkovitz said to the Goy. And he looked at him and said, why? He said, it's our holiday. It's a Christian holiday. Why it's your happiest night of your year? He said, how can I not be happy when I see millions of Goyim bow down to one Jew tonight?